Come on, come here, bud. Come on. You freaky dog. I don't need to analyze. Every word that comes out is a lie. Make it look like it's so ice, ice, ice. You won't make it to the finish line. Now if you gotta know the truth was gonna let you go. You was fine, never mind, unpredictable. Fade eye off the ground, you ain't no one. You a star, blow it up like supernova. In the nighttime, hit my hotline. Sharing secrets, you wish really was about your life. Basic bullets, with no bullets. Does your wifey know you're begging for my notice? Promise you're the same, running for the meds. Sure you like my vibe, pass my candy on my wrist. Bad habits, little rabbit. Now sit down, you can have it.
Well, here we are. I can't do a soft fade out today, but great to have you all back here on Toolbox Tech Talk. And as you can see, I've got my very favourite guest here, Bradley Paton. Bradley, we've known each other for over like 5, 6, 7 years. 9 years. Gosh, yeah. I keep saying the same number, but yeah, a long time. But first, I just want to thank everyone for turning up to watch the show live. I can see we've got Arturo from Mexico. Hola, Arturo. That's fantastic. George from I can see George. He's probably in chilly Tasmania because I'm in chilly Melbourne mountains, so similar kind of climate. G'day, Susie, High Country Homestead, and you're in sunny Mansfield. That's fantastic. And we've got the Braddies. The Braddies. Could that be any relation of yours?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay, so someone's called the Braddies is watching as well. And Raymond, g'day Raymond. It's great to have you back again. You're an absolute regular. So first up, I've had a lot of tech dramas in the last few Toolbox Tech Talks. As the stream didn't start last week, and I had to do a manual edit, and then I had echo problems a couple of times. So let me know how this one's going. It's a completely different setup to usual because normally my guest is remote. This time, Bradley kindly drove all the way from his place to here to join us live in the studio. So thank you, Bradley.
You're most welcome. But I don't want you to think it's here because I want to see you. It's the local bakeries.
Yeah, well, it's a mutual benefit because a bit of extra bakery flows onto me every time you come. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. So, Bradley, because we've got like an international audience here, even though you're very famous here in Australia, for those who don't know much about you, just tell me a little about what's your role in the industry? How do you get into this business?
Well, I guess accidentally on purpose, I started out managing a Tandy electronics store, and I did that for a couple of years, and ended up then at Target as a merchandise manager for a couple of years, and in Adelaide, where I was based, we were only doing 5.5 days a week trading. And we're just starting to do, all day Saturday and occasional Sunday for Christmas. And I had a young family, and there were all these sales reps coming in who were only doing, 5 days a week, company car, commission. And I had a technical interest, so I got a job for a company that sold UPSs and data cable and connectors, and this is back in the early to mid to late 80s. And so if you knew anything about data cables, you were a king. And
so you could crimp an RJ45 and make an Ethernet.
Well, no, RJ45s were a couple of years after that. Yes, RJ45s came into being in my time, but it was
RJ11s,
RJ11s, RJ12s, Balins and
right.
We did have RJ45 to DB25 adapters to go on the back of monitors.
Yeah,
and so in those days, a data installer was an electrician with a soldering iron, as big as your thumb tip, trying to do data pins. So it was a fun time to be in the industry, and I worked for them for 2 years, and they were a victim of the State Bank failure.
Oh no!
And so I went out to work for myself, and that was in February 1990.
So you picked up some of their clients?
Yes and no. I had to sort of, there was some customers like telecom, etc., that I used to do things for, and that was interesting in the early days because I used to make up the 25 pair data cables to go on the back of PABXs, and you had white, green, brown, green, red, green, and I'm colourblind. And so soldering these wires on was a bit of a challenge. But no, it was interesting times. UPSs were a big thing.
So any crossed wires was your fault?
Well, sitting there with a multimeter afterwards going beep, beep, beep.
Okay.
And fortunately, my wife would help me out occasionally.
Yeah, I remember the colourblind test because I was a tech too, and that was the fundamental test they gave us to even get in.
Yeah, no, I'm hopeless. I can't read the resistor code. So and even now, some of my children are still traumatised because I'd ask them to go out and get the green bag out of the car, and they'd come back in saying, "Dad, there's no green bag." My wife would say, "It's the brown bag." So no, it's and so sort of working for myself, I got to. Most of the time I would learn from customers. So you'd find an engineer that had a pet topic and you could get him to talk for hours, and just I learnt all about rectifiers and batteries and solar and UPSs, telemetry. Like in the early days, there wasn't mobile telemetry. So I did a lot of work with companies doing little RTUs that ran purely off of SMS. And so just had a lot of fun learning, solving people's problems.
That was 2 TLAs in a row.
Sorry. Remote telemetry unit. So like a PLC with communications.
Gotcha.
And so I did a lot of work. One of the products I sold was single to three-phase converters. So there was a company in Perth that using a rotary design, and so I'd run around and do the field days.
A motor.
Yes,
I remember those.
It's a three-phase motor.
Yeah,
and
the commutator's single phase on one side and three phase on the other.
Yes,
it's scary.
But what he'd done is he'd gotten a PLC, programmable logic controller, and he would switch in different amounts of capacitance so that as you varied the load, you could change the characteristics. So traditionally, like a lot of people did with VFDs, variable speed drives, variable frequency drives, you could have a pump or a lathe or something, but you'd have to have one converter per motor. So by adding the capacitance controlled by the PLC, you could change the characteristics of the phase converter by switching in and out capacitance. And so we would get people who, they bought a property and they were going to be a carpenter, and they bought all their three-phase lathes and table saws, etc. And 50 metres away they could see a three-phase pole. But then when they called up the power authority, it was going to cost them $60,000 to trench between the pole and their house. And for $10,000 or $15,000, we could provide a converter for them.
Right.
So we did all sorts of jobs like that. So at the same time...
But you said we.
Oh, me, myself and I.
Yeah, okay. But we became more than just me, myself and I, didn't it?
Well, for many years... I started working for myself in 1990, and it was just B&K Paton, Bradley and Kristen Paton.
Yep.
And then in 1996, we formed PowerPlus-Solutions. And most of the time, while I did employ people on and off, most of the time it was myself and my family. Those that have been in the industry for a while will remember M&H Power, which became Empower, and they were one of the very early supporters of solar in the industry. And there's a gentleman in Adelaide by the name of Mark Scupham who, when the Empower started out, he had a 3x3 garden shed in the backyard. And so he and I became friends. I started selling, reselling like Sonnenschein batteries for solar, like the A600s. And they were also the distributor for Outback. And so I started selling Outback inverters with the Sonnenschein batteries. And in the early days with the cables, all the cables that Empower sold, my kids made. So all the MC3, was it? What was the early one?
Yeah, just MC3s.
So MC3, MC4s, everything from 1 metre cables to 25 metre cables. Because I have 8 children, and
you had a whole workforce for it, ready to roll.
And so we made all of their cables. We made all of the handles for the Sonnenschein A400 batteries to go into golf carts, etc.
And this was part of their home learning, wasn't it?
Yes, we homeschool. It wasn't a sweatshop, I promise you, but it was a way for them to earn money in working from home. So it was sort of an interesting sort of. I was sort of buying and selling stuff on the side, but we're also supplying stuff back to Empower, and we did all of their early foldable solar panels. And, we sewed up bags for the panels to go in. And
wow.
So it, but I sort of ended up getting all the jobs that no one else wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it was too complicated for the little guys, or if it was too small for the big guys, people in Adelaide primarily and a few sort of companies interstate would come to me and ask, for a solution. So I'd sort of get product A and product B, and either small jobs I'd sell it direct through PowerPlus, or large jobs I'd sort of act as a manufacturer's agent.
So very aptly named PowerPlus-Solutions.
My wife came up with a name.
Oh,
we
perfect.
were like Acme Bradley, or trying to come up with a name, and she said, "Well, why not PowerPlus?"
Yeah.
And my daughter came up with the original logo, and the logo that the company still uses today. 2011, we moved from Adelaide to Melbourne, and that was sort of like a bit of a sea change, because in Adelaide you'd sort of sell a widget. In Melbourne you'd sell 10 or 20 widgets, and so it opened my eyes to different projects, to different relationships, and I guess where it sort of really came in, like I'd supplied, I mentioned to you earlier, 26 Outback VFX 3000s to the lighthouses around Australia, so that we could do long run time UPSs.
You better explain what those are for the audience.
Oh, another.
Not even the acronym. What is a VFX?
Oh, a VFX. Outback were one of the early players in doing transformer-based inverters, and they came up with a housing that was, to most parts, fairly environmental proof. It was made in the US, and one of their claims to fame was that there was only 3 boards inside. So if you had a problem in the field, you could just pull out the faulty board and plug another one in. They did some early work in paralleling, so you could expand for single phase or 3-phase, and so it was just a fairly robust.
It looked like a brick. It was in fact, Chris Freitas, who was the Outback engineer, I met him in San Francisco. He was telling me that the design originally was to go in the battery compartment of trucks.
Oh, right. Yes.
And of course, it would be out in the weather, underneath the truck with all the salt and dust and dirt. So they had to make those sealed ones really good, because there was a sealed and unsealed version.
Well, they made a promotional video of one of those bolted to the bull bar of the front of a 4-wheel drive and drove around Outback Australia in it.
Yeah.
With the inverter still working.
Yeah, yeah. So they were tough. Yeah.
So, and I supplied a lot of those into like water treatment plants, where you've got sort of corrosive gases in the air. So for UPSs in water treatment plants. It was quite a popular product.
So it's kind of funny, because people often, when they hear the name Outback, they think, oh, it's Australian. Because but I know the story behind the name, because Xantrax, which was the parent company before it branched off, was developing a product out the back. And they kept on talking about this product out the back. Yes. And in the end, they called it Outback.
Yes. So I would sort of get my fingers into everything. So communications, telemetry, solar for agriculture, all those sorts of things. And I had been supplying some custom metalwork to a communications contractor in WA for BHP. And I got a phone call from him one day saying, look, I've got this great job at a new communications contractor in Perth, and there's a guy here who loves batteries, and you love batteries, so you two should get together. And so I gave this guy a call. He was working as a contract and consulting engineer for a communications company in Perth, and for his 50th birthday, his wife and children had sent him to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Oh, CES.
Yes.
Yep.
And
Can you slide over a little bit? You're just actually going off screen almost.
and so he went there and he gathered all this information on lithium cells and came back
When was this?
2015.
Okay.
And he'd narrowed down to a couple of specialist suppliers in China, and in those days, cylindrical cells were your main option, and companies used to get multiple cylindrical cells and put them into a plastic brick, and so you'd have a 3.2 volt brick that could be 100, 200 amp hour, and so this company in Perth was getting these bricks and putting them in the bottom of a industrial cabinet or a trailer, BMS wires running everywhere, to do their 48 volts for their communication projects. And so this engineer and myself, we sat down in one of the back lunchrooms and for a day or two, and because I've been doing a lot of work with rack mount UPSs, I said, well, why don't we design a rack mount battery? So went away, got some ideas. The company he was working for supported him in prototyping some bits and pieces, and they, long story short, came up with a rack. I supplied some Victron UPSs for doing all the testing, and the data coming back from these cells matched pretty much the manufacturers, and that's how the Gen Z battery was born.
Oh, right. So you're actually involved in the development of the Gen Z battery.
Well, I was an outsider.
An outsider.
But yes, it was sort of the rack mount idea and all the early testing. And so at the time, there was a downturn in the mining industry, and so a lot of the salespeople in this company were laid off. And so I stuck up my hand and said, I'll be the distributor. And which worked well, and that's when I met you, because we did the trials with the eColt batteries in parallel, and the rest is sort of history.
So for those who are not familiar with Gen Z, it's an Australian company based in Western Australia. They supply telemetry gear for mining sites, and
they're specialist in communications.
I think they cover, in terms of area, the biggest area in Australia.
I'd say they're one of the largest, if not the largest in Australia, and they did a lot of work for NBN.
Yep.
And they did a lot of groundbreaking work with data over radio for mine sites, etc.
Yeah.
So they were innovators in Australia.
And they were using lead acid monoblocks back then, the sort of 150 amp hour 12 volt units in 4 in series to run the telco stuff. But in a cabinet on a mine site, there'd be 55 degrees in that cabinet, which is not nice for lead.
I would say they would have been one of the very early adopters of lithium ferrophosphate for especially mine site work with communications.
The irony that they're probably mining lithium at the mine site. Well, there's one mine anyway. But yeah, that's kind of fun. Right, so that was your toe in the water with a rack mount battery selling Gen Zs.
Yes.
And of course they came here. The Gen Z were very generous. They gave us, I think, about 9 of their battery modules,
10.
which we...
10?
10 was it? Yeah.
Yes.
I've still got some actually. And we put them in parallel with an Occult Ultra battery, which is an Australian developed product, no longer in business, unfortunately, like another story of Australia's great ideas that sort of fizzle out for one reason or another. But they were making a sort of a high performance lead acid battery, and we thought, well, why don't we try and parallel them together to get the best of both worlds? So something that has a really fast charge like lithium, and something that has a long duration like lead. Yeah.
Well, the beauty of the eColts is that you didn't have to do the equalised charge because the BMS looked after it. So with the lithium in parallel, the lithium would charge first, then the occults would charge, and the lithiums would discharge first, and then the occults would discharge. So the theory was that if you had an aging set of lead-acid batteries, in theory you could put the lithiums in to do the daily work, and the lead acids you'd extend their life and they could be used for the the deep discharges in bad weather.
I'm stretching my memory here, but I think the problem was that the equalization voltage for the lithium was higher than the absorption voltage for the occult, so the lithiums wouldn't get equalized.
No. Yeah, it couldn't quite lift the voltage up. Every once a month or something, you'd have to turn the isolator off for the e-cults.
A bit manual.
But it sort of worked.
Yeah.
It was fun.
And so that's when you were coming here, I was running training courses here, and you'd bring along some fun product. I remember you brought a range of lithium batteries, including this 12-volt battery, which I famously said to standing there with a bunch of my students looking at it on the ground, what happens if I short it out? And you said, it's no problem at all. And so we shorted it out. What happened?
It took a little while to wake up again.
But you looked a little bit sad.
Well, no, there was no warning. We were just standing around having a chat, and you walk up with a piece of wire and go bang.
I think I asked, but yes.
Well, yes.
So it turns out that the BMS goes into safe mode for like half an hour, just to give you time to take that short circuit off.
Yes, I was. It wasn't something that I had tried previously.
Yeah. So we did prove that battery was short circuit tolerant, so it didn't blow up. Yeah.
So after that, Gen Z were focused on the communication, so 48 volt, and they did a 24 volt battery was their focus. So 2017, we formed PowerPlus-Energy to do 120 volt and 400 volt batteries.
Oh, so not 48, right?
No.
120. Why 120?
It's electronic.
Okay.
So the SP Pros.
Yeah.
So, and while you could string multiple batteries together to do 120 volts, my vision was to do a single battery that you would be 120 volts. And so that's when we headed down. This was actually still when I was working by myself. So I met an engineer at University of Wollongong who he and an honours student had started a business on the side developing BMS boards. So at the school, they'd done high voltage for electric vehicles, but they'd started up their own business doing high voltage BMS boards. So I then, the engineer that I'd met in Perth, he had left Gen Z the year before. He was doing some consulting work on high definition cameras in aeroplanes. And
yes.
The
Spookfish.
Yes. And so he'd been involved in the original design, etc., and they invited him back to help do final testing, etc., get a few bugs out. And because I was looking at this BMS board in Wollongong, I just asked him whether he could help me evaluate it. And we eventually decided to go into business together. And during 2018,
this was Simon Chan, right?
Yes. So very clever man. So PowerPlus-Solutions was distributing Gen Z, and PowerPlus-Solutions was going to sell the PowerPlus-Energy products. During 2018, sort of Gen Z and PowerPlus had a bit of a misunderstanding and a falling out. And so in 2018, we designed, we needed to have a product to sell, so we designed our own 48 volt battery. It was sort of quite different to Gen Z's, sort of a different approach.
Right, so you were initially going for a 120 and a 400 volt battery, but selling Gen Z's 48s, but then they're no longer available.
Yep.
Business relationship wasn't working, and so you decided to make your own.
Yes.
Right.
So we, different construction, different metalwork, different connectors, it was sort of things that I'd wanted to add to the product. And my father was a sheet metal tradesman and a trade teacher, and so I felt quite comfortable around the metalwork side of it, and was able to work with some local suppliers to design our 2RU case.
So was this when you were operating out of a 1.5 square metre canards hire?
No, we'd expanded to a 4.5 metre.
Really?
Yes.
Big time?
Yes. So it was, we were out at Kennard's storage at Springvale.
Yes.
And we ended up We had two 4.5 square metre units upstairs and a 3 metre unit for storing marketing, and then we had two 9 metre units downstairs for holding stock.
I remember that mezzanine floor that you put in there. Yeah. Had to go up
No,
and down.
that was Power Road.
Oh, that was the next big step.
Oh, yeah. So, see, my wife and my children had come to help me, and one day Kristen got sick of going upstairs to the printer to get the packing slip, and then to another unit to find the tape gun, and then downstairs to stick things on. And so she made me go out and hire a warehouse. So we found a 200 square metre unit at Power Road. So the problem was, it was PowerPlus-Energy at Power Road, and the complex of the 14 units was called the Power Centre. So I was never going to leave. That was my home forever. And when the unit alongside came available, we rented that to be able to build the cabinets. And then there was a fire in Unit 1, which was the fancy unit, and I badly wanted to lease that as well. But again, we had Craig Hunter come to work for us, and we'd built the mezzanine, and we had run out of space, and so we went and leased 1,600 square metres in the old Siemens Centre on Mountain Highway.
Oh, God, that's exponential growth. So 1.5 metre was the original Kennards.
Yes.
Then the 4.5.
Yes.
Then a factory unit in
200
Power
square
Road,
metres.
200.
And then 6 months later, we went to 400.
400. And then you went to 16,000.
No, 1,600.
Oh, sorry, 1,600.
Yes.
So I carry away with the numbers. But still, that's a huge jump up. Yep. I remember visiting that place. It's a massive building. It's an old Siemens factory.
Yes. Yeah. And so we were there for maybe 6 months or so, but then COVID hit, and so that we could stay open, we had to separate all of our staff so that they had their own workstations and they had their own tools, and we had to hold more stock because there were problems getting containers out of China. And so we leased another 1,400 square metres. So within 12 months, we'd gone from 400 square metres to 3,000 square metres. And it was a good spot because we could rifle desks and chairs out of the empty sections of Siemens, and a lot of our test cabinets came out of
It was kind of like post-apocalypse, that building. Like they just walked out and left everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so my staff thought it was a bit strange that the owner of this business was running around grabbing all this stuff. Even some of our test benches came out of the data lab and things like that. But unfortunately, the site was being developed, and they wanted us to go into a temporary lease, but there was no indoor access to the warehouse.
Oh.
So we had 6 weeks to find a new premises. And so that's when we found the 8,000 square metres at Scoresby. And
that was an old Australia Post building, wasn't it?
Originally it was Australia Post, and then prior to us being in, there was a printer there like about 2 years before. But the funny thing about that is the printer's name was P-A-U-E-R, Power. And so 3 years before, when we were in the 200 square metres, my wife and I leased a house 3 streets away. And when we'd walk the dog at night, I would joke, "Oh, Kristen, look, here's our new factory, ha ha ha, from 400 to 8,000." And 3 years later, this is the building we leased. And so yes, we did have to pull down the old power sign and put up PowerPlus-Energy, but it was sort of a family joke that we'd gone from we'd sort of seen the vision that's where we'd be in 3 years' time.
Right. So that's what, to 2022.
2022 we moved into, so 4 years after leaving Kennards, we had an 8,000 square metre factory.
So you were lucky to get through COVID and keep your staff.
Yes, we actually shut the factory down for 2 or 3 weeks, but we because we'd sort of worked so hard to build up the team, we kept paying their wages, and it worked in our favour. And I think in part COVID may have helped us But it also made life interesting as well. The Chinese government changed their customs regulations. So if you had product rolling out of the factory, it would you could get a container and a week later it's on the ship. So they changed the regulations that you had to get each shipment inspected, and you couldn't definitely book an inspection date. That was random, and then you weren't allowed to book a container until you had your inspection certificate. And then because of COVID, there was a backlog of containers in the US not making it back to China, and so it could take you 3 months to find a container and get it on the ship. And that's one of the reasons why we had to hold so much more stock.
I remember visiting, the factory, the old Siemens factory, and you had a lot of stock in 2022, I think it was. Yeah, that was lucky.
Yeah,
it saved you.
Oh yes, no, it was. But at the same time, you had to hold a lot of stock. But then again, because we manufactured in Australia and we were using local suppliers, our cable, our packaging, labelling, the metalwork was all manufactured locally. And it's kind of interesting because after near the end of COVID, we had 2 of our suppliers come to us and say, look, if it wasn't for what we had bought during that time and paying our bills on time, that their family businesses would have closed down. So it made it easier for me to design things because I was working with local, draftsmen and tradesmen. But it also, the money went back into other local businesses.
So during this time, the 48-volt battery really took off.
Oh yes,
yeah.
So we, I guess I don't know whether it's purely ideologically, or we just felt strongly that for our market, especially for off-grid remote sites, that the cylindrical cells offered a more robust option. So our product was designed around cylindrical cells. We're always very cautious because the Chinese government rewarded innovation, and so that innovation was measured by increased capacity. And so, but we were fairly conservative, partly because of yield rates coming out of the factory, but also partly because in Australia, we had to offer a 10-year warranty. And initially, we started out with a 5-year warranty, but the industry had moved to a 10-year warranty, and unfortunately, salespeople sell using warranty rather than the features and the quality of the product. So we had to go to a 10-year warranty, and so rather than like the original cells were 3.2 amp hour, but you could get 3.8, 4 amp hour. We were very slow to go to larger cells because of the reliability. We had to be sure that what we're offering was going to work for 10 years.
I mean, they were physically the same dimensions,
yes,
but different amp hour capacities. How did they manage to get more amp hours out of the same physical size?
Mainly in the manufacturing process, but also by improving the lithium compound mixtures, so getting finer particles, and by being able to roll them more tightly. Nowadays you can get 5 amp hour cells in the same size. However, where typically the cells are designed for 3C, and if you run them at 0.5C, that's how you get your 10 years out of them, 80% depth of discharge. The tighter you wind them, the lower the C rate the manufacturer sort of recommends to get long life. So where we would have previously have recommended 0.5C and these 5 amp hour cells, realistically to get that 10-year life, you don't want to be discharging quicker than, say, 0.2C. And in off-grid, that's fine because you're discharging the battery over 1 or 2 days, and so it's not a problem. But in domestic, people want to suck everything out of the battery as quick as they can. So it's not automatic that going to a high capacity cell makes for a better battery. But then you have the competing interest on the other side is the lower dollar per kilowatt hour. If you've got the same size battery, the same costs, the same BMS cost, you can reduce the dollar per kilowatt hour price by increasing the capacity of the cells. So there's always this competing interest. The longevity and the reliability versus the cost to buy.
So you actually had two streams, the eco
Yes.
and the
At the time,
black ones. What are we calling those?
the Lifes.
The Lives.
Yes.
Yep. LIFE, yep.
So at the time, in 2018, 2019, you had BYD and Pylon Tech, batteries like that were becoming quite popular on the market, and they were selling for close to $200 a kilowatt hour less than what our life premiums were, and so we found actually a premium cell supplier recommended them as a middle of the road average sort of cell, and we were able to offer a battery at a lot closer price point. So with the premium battery at the time, we would offer an 80% end-of-life warranty. With the Eco, we would offer a 60%, which sort of matched what BYD and the others were doing at the time. So, and that gave an installer the option of, well, here's the Australian-made budget model, and it's reasonably good battery, and here's the Australian-made premium model. So it actually helped the sales of the premium model increase because it made it easier for installers to upsell.
So just to explain that end of life or capacity end of warranty, when you say 60%, that's 60% of what was originally rated at.
Yes.
After 10 years of cycling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, a lot of the in-house laboratory testing actually showed that LFP doesn't, if you treat it well, it doesn't particularly degrade quickly. But in the real world, where you have different qualities of charges, you have different environments, it might be hotter or colder, there's other things that will affect the natural aging of the lithium cells. And so manufacturers have to be a little bit cautious in the warranty. Like we had one site over in WA where the batteries, I think they're about 5 years old, and the customer was curious. It was an installer, and so we did a capacity test on the batteries, and they were still up, in the mid to high 90s in capacity.
Right.
After 5 years, but again, they were being treated gently.
Yeah. Can you define what treated well is for a lithium battery?
I guess one of the interesting things in the early days was that, and I remember coming up here and doing classes with you, for your students, is that we were comparing ourselves to lead acid. And so lithium ferrophosphate, in my mind, is lead acid on steroids. All right. So it's, everyone thinks that lithium is this great, wonderful, saviour of the energy storage industry. And to some ways it is. However, it's still a battery. And so you can hammer it and make it do all these wonderful things, but one of the offsets is it will affect the natural aging of the cells. So, we're a lead acid battery. Let's say an AGM or a gel battery. If you do 100% depth of discharge, you might get 500 or 600 cycles. With a lithium, if you treat it the same way, you'll get maybe 2,000 cycles. Because we have to offer a 10-year warranty, if you reduce the daily depth of discharge to 80%, then you'll most probably get around 4,000 cycles with the same sort of natural aging. And again, if you discharge it at 3C, you'll get 900 cycles. If you discharge it at 0.2C to 80% or maybe 60%, you might get 7,000 or 10,000 cycles. So the way you treat the battery will have some effect on its natural aging and how much life you'll get out of the battery.
It makes me think of the system we have here at the Smart Energy Lab. We've got 40 of the 48 40 PS.
They're Ps, but with the data logger built in.
The data log built in, yeah. And we cycle them about 80% every day.
Yes.
So they've been working really hard for probably about 4 years now.
Yeah, getting close.
Yeah. So I guess with the data logger, we can find out sort of a bit more information about, the cell voltages, etc. I remember Simon Chan saying to me that basically every cycle takes a little bit of voltage off the cell. Little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of...
So capacity loss is voltage loss. So after
Yes.
10 years, the voltage has dropped a little bit.
But like if you look at so with a lead acid battery, as it degraded, it would get to a point where it dropped off.
Yeah.
Whereas with lithium, it seems to be more linear. And so one of our initial suppliers did some longevity tests, and they were doing 1C discharges down to 55% depth of discharge. And after 20 years of accelerated testing, the batteries were still delivering that 55% after 20 years. Now, we weren't provided with information as to what the true remaining capacity of the cell was, but at a 1C discharge in a controlled environment with a controlled power supply and load, the cell was at the equivalent of 20 years, it was still delivering 55%.
Right. We might just have a pause here because there's some questions have been coming in from the audience, and I should remind those who are watching that I'm actually just checking the live chat for questions. So let's just have a little review here. There's been some people saying hi. G'day, Wrigley from Nelson. G'day, Ray. And we've got Mark. So Mark Kavanagh, who was actually my guest last week, he's got a little bit of let's call it a mea culpa. He wanted me to remind you that there was a little bit of a mistake in one of the statements made, which was his correction is the risk of explosion label. Didn't need to be 175 millimeters, but turns out Tesla showed me that I was wrong, that he was wrong, and got mixed up with the toxic fume label. So yes, it does actually have to be 175 mil.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the risk of explosion. So thanks for
that was
clearing
from
that
last
up.
week, yes.
Yeah, that's from last week. And he also goes on to say, also the reason the Tesla label font is a suggestion is so big is ESV, it's Energy Safety Victoria, our regulator here in Victoria, has asked him to keep with the 1994 signing standard. So, sorry, that's a Australian standard for signage. It tells you, how big a sign lettering needs to be, whether it's informative or a title. So I guess that's the reason for it. Oh, and g'day, Ian, my old friend Ian from Sydney. G'day. And what Ian asks, hi, does Bradley see a path for sodium-ion cells in the PowerPlus future?
Well, just to clarify things a little bit, just so I'm not speaking out of turn, back in 2023, my two silent business partners wanted to sell their shares, and they found a buyer, a publicly listed company bought their shares and became the majority owner of PowerPlus-Energy, and they have part of the process was that they sort of took control of the business, so put their own management team in. So technically, I'm no longer working for PowerPlus-Energy. My wife and I.
But you're still part owner.
Oh yeah, still part. I'm sort of the smallest shareholder now.
So you're now a silent partner.
Oh, yeah, silent partner. So Kristen and I have gone back to working in the PowerPlus-Solutions business. And to answer your question, a year or so ago, PowerPlus-Energy was looking at sodium ion. At that time, the materials for an LFP battery was getting more expensive. And so a lot of Chinese manufacturers were looking to sodium ion as the next great hope. There's a lot of merit to sodium ion, but then sort of the suppliers I was talking to, things cooled off on the attractiveness of sodium ion because the cost to building LFP had dropped significantly. So it was less. There was less interest in doing R&D. However, I've just been to Intersolar in Munich, and I was surprised at the number of companies that were promoting sodium ion.
Really?
Yes. Oh. So a lot of work has gone into it. There are merits with sodium ion. There's yes, people pushing sodium ion will refer to sort of the safety issues. And that, in my mind, that is true more with NMC and NCA. LFP doesn't actually burn.
Hang on, that was a whole bunch of TLAs.
Right,
So those are all types of lithium-ion batteries, right?
yes,
In
yes.
cells.
So nickel metal
Manganese.
manganese cobalt
NMC, yep.
and then the nickel cobalt aluminium.
Yep.
So they were very popular in the early days because of the high energy density.
You've got one on your mobile phone and laptop
Yes.
computer still.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, and they in the early days, as with any technology, you have challenges because the cells are actually quite safe as long as you use them appropriately. Now, if you overcharge them or over temperature or over voltage or you puncture them, you've got a lot of energy that's trying to get out. And while I'm not an expert in this field, the process, there's some oxidization and you get flame. Right? And because it's like a little bar radiator, once that flame starts, there's no real way of extinguishing it. You can manage the heat, but it's going to burn, as we've seen. So, the hoverboard, Samsung phones, the occasional Tesla car, but primarily they were quite safe. The advantage of LFP is that, sure, you have the same, you got your 10 watt hours or 20 watt hours in a cell, but it will get hot. It will vaporize the electrolyte. You'll get a nasty gas that you don't want to breathe in. And while there is a hydrogen component, typically the amount of hydrogen or the environment's in, it doesn't explode or catch fire, right? You're dealing with something that's going to take 30 to 60 minutes to dissipate the heat out of the battery and some smoke. But and look, you might have some insulation on wire that might get a bit of flame, but the cells themselves don't burn.
Can I do a comparison? People often say, electric vehicles, they're dangerous because lithium batteries can catch fire and burn your car and you'll die. So can I just point out that for a start, the insurance industry in the US has got stats on the number of car fires per 100,000 cars.
Yes.
And petrol cars are much more likely to burn. The other thing is the difference with a fire in a lithium battery powered vehicle is that you get out of the vehicle because it starts smoking and you start recording a video of it slowly catching on fire. Whereas when your petrol tank catches on fire, you don't have time to get your phone out.
Yes.
It's all over.
It's, look, PowerPlus-Energy built 65,000 batteries in the 5 years. And of those, I think from memory, there's been about 5 thermal events. And most of those were in systems that had monitoring, and we believe fairly confidently that some were overcharged, some were deeply discharged and then charged at a high rate, and some weren't balanced for 6 or 9 months, and then the charge got put onto them. So whether because they get hot, it's hard to do a full diagnostics, but they're we believe that potentially the BMS board might have failed, or so that it wasn't balancing properly, or it didn't switch off. But in each instance, the powder coat on the side of the case was still there. The glass cabinet, the door was still there. More damage was done by people with fire extinguishers blowing retardant than what the battery caused. So the connectors were still the plastic.
Because that's very corrosive, that retardant.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's in the handful of.
You keep sliding away from me. Come on.
Well, it's this chair, and the music you were playing before. I can see why they call you DJ Glenmo. So yes, it's sort of lithium ferrophosphate, and especially like now the BMS boards, the quality of the BMS boards, the monitoring, the preventative measures. It's so much better now than what it was 6-7 years ago.
I think you had some batteries go through a bushfire too.
Oh yeah, that was one of my early marketing wins. Was bushfire went through New South Wales.
Yes,
and the farmer had taken some photos of the night before with all the flames, and then he went out to the battery shed in the morning, and the SP Pro was still on the wall. Its lights were on. Oh, no, actually, maybe they were off because the switchgear with the fuses, that had all melted. And all the plastic, everything had melted. And there was our battery box, all covered in soot and whatever. And they opened the door of the cabinet, and the lights were still on the the life batteries inside the box. So we'd proudly show her, look, our batteries went through a bushfire.
They're fireproof.
Yes, it's look, literally with LFP. The only thing you need to do is make sure that you don't have combustible materials up against the case, right? Which is just common sense. And it's unlikely that an LFP battery would cause a fire outside of its own container. And look, some, as I keep getting reminded on Facebook solar cutter groups, there are some batteries out there that have inbuilt fire retardant, which in my mind, it may sort of help reduce heat transfer, but once a lithium cell, once heat fails mechanically, it's going to let the heat, going to let the energy out. The fire retardant won't stop that. It will only stop. It may minimise the transfer of heat.
I think the strategy is monitor cell temperatures so you can protect from thermal runaway at the early stage before it becomes runaway.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I like in our early days, we did a lead acid replacement.
Yeah.
And PowerPlus-Energy and other companies, I still like the concept of a self-managed battery, so that you only have the inverter can do whatever it wants. The battery is supplying the watts. However, I believe now that having monitoring on the battery so that, the BMS will pick up, this BMS board's getting a bit hotter during balancing, or these cells are getting a bit warmer. So that becomes a preventative maintenance issue where you might replace a $200 BMS board versus 18 months down the track when the battery finally fails and you've got to replace a $2,000 battery. So minimising the risk and the expense for the manufacturer, but also providing a better experience for the end user and the installer.
Better explain that self-managed thing too. So people are often familiar with the residential batteries, which are like stackable, all-in-one, and generally those are what's known as managed batteries because the inverter and the battery communicate with each other. And so, for instance, if the battery is getting a little bit too hot, it can tell the inverter slow down. If it's too cold, it can say slow down, or it can say I'm fine. Just give me the full rate of charge current or discharge that you're capable of. But a self-managed battery has the inbuilt protection, but it doesn't have the communication.
Look, the industry is changing a little bit, and possibly I'm sort of stuck in the past a little bit. However, especially with off-grid and fringe-of-grid installations, if the CAN bus stops working, then the whole system shuts down. Whereas, and there's a whole range of new ideas and solutions out there now, so this is just a general comment. The beauty of, I guess, the self-managed approach was that it basically was just a bucket of watts, and your inverter decided what it could or couldn't do. We designed the battery to be robust enough that if it was a bit warmer or a bit colder, the battery looked after itself. Nowadays, there's a few more options. Some batteries will switch from a managed to self-managed mode. I guess one of the hangovers from this is that as a supplier of equipment to the solar industry, my customers, the installers, are responsible for that system for 10 years. And so I always remember in the early days, you had a particular brand cabinet that had been supplied to you, and it had 6 battery slots, and the supplier had generously donated 5 batteries to you. And you called them up 6 months later and said, I've got an empty battery slot. It would look so much better if you filled the battery slot. And the supplier said, sorry, we don't make that battery anymore.
That's right. It was supposed to be upgradable, but only for a few months before they changed the model.
And so I'm a strong proponent of a DC centralized system rather than a COM centralized system. And And I've sort of been trying to think of examples, and all the examples I can think of, I'm sort of shooting myself in the foot, because my favourite car ever was a 1965 XP4 Fairmont. It was a beautiful car to drive. It had a 200 Super Pursuit motor and 14-inch wheels with disc brakes and had carpet on the floor. And I loved this car. But would I swap that car for my 2024 with cruise control, air conditioning, heated seats? Would I swap the cars, especially country journeys? Most probably not. And so, however.
Would you swap back?
Yeah, I'd love to go for a nostalgic drive in one, but I wouldn't swap it as my daily driver. Now, it's the same with technology. Like, you and others love SIG Energy, and from an engineering point of view, it's a beautiful product. The software, the way it goes together. The concept of having the DC-DC converter on the battery pack so you can mix and match old and new and different capacities. It's absolutely brilliant engineering. But in 6 or 7 years' time, if the inverter fails, you would have a different experience than if you had, say, BYD. And let's say the Fronius fails, you can remove the Fronius and put in a Day or a Solus or a Solenteg or whatever. You have some flexibility as long.
But isn't that what the warranty's for?
Yes, if
it fails within the warranty period,
if the company is there.
Okay, that's a whole another question.
Yes, so it's sort of, or it may be that they've got a new wonderful design, and getting the replacement is going to come from overseas or take 3 months, right? And so, look again. I know. See, my old XP Ford. I could have a picnic in the engine bay, and I could work on the engine myself. With my Nissan, there's no hope. Like it's in the Ford, I could get a $3 light globe and replace the dash light globe. In the Nissan, it's a $2,000 or $3,000 replacement dashboard. So it's not a simple question to answer, but I guess, and maybe it's where I started in the industry, I feel more comfortable. So even like with the Escape 20 that PowerPlus-Energy builds, it's a DC-centric system. Now we have Modbus command. We can control Froniuses and SMAs via Modbus. We have the monitoring. We have a modem on there. So we have all the tech, but it's a 48-volt DC-centric system. So if the C plus T inverters failed, and for whatever reason it's going to take a while to remedy the situation, you could get some SP Pros or some SMAs or some Days or some Victrons and get the customer back up and running. Whereas with these really sexy, great, advanced systems, you're totally reliant on the original supplier to help you get out of trouble.
All right, I'm going to give you another perspective on this one, because there's always two ways of looking at something. So people sometimes say, we're talking about SIG Energy, for instance, a company which is only just over 1 year old, already the most popular energy storage brand in Australia, which is amazing within 1 year. And that says something about how...
And a lot of companies are starting to copy them now. Mirror them.
Mirror them, yes. I did see the Fronius, the Goodwee, it's a very similar form factor.
In Munich, there are a handful of them.
A handful?
So, yes, you have... See, a lot of companies are still doing the 48-volt stack.
Yeah.
But there's a handful of companies now that are doing the DC-DC converters on the side of the packs.
Right. So I guess the way I'm looking at it is occasionally along comes a technology leap, right? And so, let's use phones, for instance. We used to have these flip phones and Nokia 6110s, etc. Yep. And then Apple came out with the iPhone, and, companies... who made phones like Nokia thought it's a gimmick, it's not going to catch on. But what do you know? It basically was a game changer because the technology was so exciting, even though it was a brand new concept. It just took over. So I'm thinking to some extent what SIG Energy have done is an iPhone moment for energy storage, is rethink how energy storage should be done. But the other criticism, and Mark Kavanagh made this point in his chat with me, was that a company only being a year and a bit old, your point, which is what about if there's a problem with the company in the future, will you be able to get replacements for it? Well, you got to look at it in a bit broader perspective, I think. So I know quite a bit about SIG Energy. I've been to their factory. I've met the CEO and many of their senior management, and they're all actually from Huawei. So you're basically getting a very mature bunch of people from a very mature company. Like Huawei was founded in 1987.
Yes.
Who formed their own branch, you could say. You know, they're using the similar technologies, but their own. And so they're not really just new kids with a new idea. And so sometimes innovation trumps longevity.
Oh, yes.
And can I make one more comparison too? And it's my favourite one. It's like, would you buy a digital phone from Kodak? A digital camera from Kodak? Would you buy a digital camera from Kodak? Because Kodak's, ancient.
Yes.
They've been around forever, but
Yep.
they didn't innovate. So sometimes innovation trumps, but there's a trust factor in that. So you have to trust that innovation is worth it. So early adopters are the brave, who go, well, I think it's gonna make it. And so time will tell.
Well, you have a similar thing possibly with the car industry. I remember reading a article, it's only about 12 months ago, and they actually spoke very highly of all of the EVs that were available on the market, and there's more and more coming. However, what they did point out was that the supply chain and the support network in Australia for those EVs is very fragile. So you have the old faithfuls, Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, etc., Volkswagen, where I don't think anyone would buy one of those cars not knowing that there was going to be spare parts. And after a while, there's an aftermarket industry to support it. However, this journalist did make out the point that the companies importing some of these even well-known EV brands, other than Tesla, who are here in their own right, the warranty kept changing, or whether they were stocking spare parts in Australia or bringing them in as required. So that is... domestically, it's not as much of a problem because we've got the grid there. But again, in our traditional market, the inverter, the SP Pro, the Victron, the SMA, that is that person's lifeline as far as having clean, reliable power. And I think, actually,
Can I agree with you on that point? And can I give a counter reverse statement of what I just made, which is for off-grid, reliability is number one of the product, and number two is support of that product. Mm-hmm. And so, because I come from an off-grid installer background, and if an off-grid system fails, the customer expects you to fix it straight away. It could be Christmas Day. You can't say, I'll get back to you in a few months when we come back from Bali, because it's essential service. You're actually basically their DNSP. You've provided them with a essential service for their life. So you've got to have a really high level of trust in that product. I bought my first Selectronic inverter in 1991, SA21, I think it was. We got struck by lightning a few days before Christmas, and it blew up the inverter.
Yes.
I contacted Selectronic. They sent me, because they knew that I was a technician, I could do it, the circuit boards to replace in the inverter, and they arrived in time for Christmas. And so I fixed it.
And look, and that was one of the early successes of PowerPlus-Energy, is that Craig and I would answer our phones on the weekend and at night, and because of his history with SP Pro and my general experience with inverters, we could help people out at 9 o'clock on a Friday night or Sunday morning. Look, it's a challenge, and the industry's going through some interesting changes at the moment. The new federal government scheme for batteries is going to shake things up. Considering that the amount of product that is made overseas, unfortunately, I'd say 90% of the money from that program is going to end up in overseas companies because of the quality and the price that they're able to manufacture for. But you mentioned Selectronic, through no fault of their own, standards and rebates like this are going to make it a challenge for them to sell product.
I think they've just had a bit of a win, which is VPP isn't required for off-grid for the battery rebate now. That's just been confirmed by federal government. So that was going to be a showstopper for them because they didn't have a VPP solution for the SP Pro. Mm. But for new innovators, getting past the CEC approved roadshow,
even if they have a UL listed
Yep.
or a IEC 62619 product,
Yeah.
reports are now that it will take between 5 to 9 months to get a product through the process of certification or approval with CC.
Which is basically a document review.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's how fast they can read the documents.
And it's sort of, I know there's a lot of boutique battery manufacturers in Australia, and they relied primarily on selling into off-grid applications. And while the rebate is a wonderful thing for customers, that's going to make it harder. So these small companies, they'll have to spend $30,000 getting their product certified, primarily overseas. Then they'll have to spend another $5,000 to get it listed as an approved product on the CC list. And where historically they could have used the income from their off-grid sales if they wanted to sell on-grid and get the approvals, nowadays they've lost that revenue stream because of that time lapse it'll take for the CC to process applications.
Yeah. Hey, Bradley, I just realised we've been going for an hour. Does
that mean I like the sound of my own voice?
I think we both do. But I do have a little prop that I wanted to bring in.
Sure.
Let me simply talking about batteries, something that you initiated for me.
Uh-oh. Oh dear.
Recognise these?
Well, I mean that doesn't even fit.
How many are there? What have we got here?
Here we go. We can. It's I remembered when you Selectronic announced their was it their 50th anniversary?
No, it was our 50th.
Oh, your 50th.
So Muramura Co-op, where I live, it was 50 years old last year.
Yes.
And Selectronic made me, and you can see it actually behind Bradley if Bradley moves. There it is. The golden 482 that Selectronic presented the co-op with as a celebration of our 50 years. And ironically, they had their 60th, I think, last year.
Oh, right.
so to longevity. So you then propped up in the middle of that event and said, "Oh, Glenn, I'll get you some gold batteries to go with it." And so here's one of the 10 that's just turned up.
Well, it took a little while for the guys in the factory to match the colour.
They got the same paint even.
Oh, right.
They got the code for the paint, and so it's an identical paint colour. And so, yeah, we'll have 10 of those sitting in the corner there, powering the whole studio. So this studio will be gold powered, care of PowerPlus and Selectronic.
Credit needs to go to Shane Pollard for finishing that off.
Yes, and it is the new model too, which I'll do a little tech review on it when we've got one on the desk. So this is the Eco 4847P, so 4.7 kilowatt hours, 48 volt.
Yes. So it's got the fully Australian designed BMS board in it. Lots of improvements over the original analog board, so it's sort of a hybrid digital board. So multiple levels of protection. It can handle different levels of short circuit cutoff or overcurrent cutoff, additional temperature probes in it. And so it's sort of carrying on that tradition of a self-managed battery, but with the LED on the front, it will actually tell you why it turned off. So it just provides that little bit of information without losing the lead acid replacement characteristics. The connectors on the side still have a volt-free contact, but there is a digital board that's been released for and a special telco battery that I think PowerPlus-Energy have announced fairly recently. So same product, but it has a few extra features for monitoring temperature, etc. So I don't know whether it's going to actually end up in this style of product.
So what are these ports currently?
They have a volt-free alarm contact. So
so
if the circuit
alarm
breaker trips, or if the BMS shuts down, it'll go open circuit.
Right.
So it just gives you some fairly basic monitoring.
Yep. Okay.
But as I said, 65,000 of these batteries, and very few problems. Yeah, very few problems. It's sort of it's been a good, reliable sort of design, and I guess we were blessed in the early days because most off-grid installers knew what they were doing. And so the advantage was they were going to design the system properly. Typically it was Selectronic or SMA with some Victron. However, now that the market's grown, by adding monitoring, it just gives you that early warning. The battery's a bit hot, or the cells aren't balancing properly. So rather than it becoming a problem and it fails, they can sort of look at that down the track. So I'm not quite sure what their plans are, but this has been just a really great, reliable product.
Yeah, the biggest selling Australian-made battery.
Well, to put things into perspective, I saw a report out of China and it listed all of the batteries sold in Australia, and 1% was for PowerPlus-Energy and 1% was PPE. So we had 2% of the Australian market, apparently, according to the Chinese. And it was, look, you go to these international trade shows and you'd be walking down an aisle and you'd walk up to a stand of one of the cell manufacturers and they'd look at your badge. Oh, PPE, we know PPE. So it was sort of, I felt a little bit famous.
I think there's a rap song that sounds a bit like that. PPP, UPP. But so now your new journey is under the name PowerPlus-Solutions.
Yep, we're back with our original family business.
And I believe you're back in the Canards.
Yes, I put my first pallet in my Kennard storage unit, and it's kind of funny, the full circle.
So I think it's going to be watch the space, what Bradley does next.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of I've had a history in industrial, commercial sort of products and applications. The domestic is becoming very crowded. I saw some very interesting toys in Munich, things that either other people aren't doing or doing differently than what's available in Australia now. But there's some companies there that I've done work with for 10 or 15 years that have got new products out. A lot of rack mountable stuff, a lot of modular, even grid scale modular systems that have achieved high energy densities, but you can sort of build this a little bit like SIG Energy are doing with their battery modules. But imagine that on a 500 kilowatt, 1 megawatt scale, doing similar things to what SIG Energy are doing. It's lots of really interesting. The whole balcony power system thing is big in Europe, and there's lots of product that tick those boxes. And so I'm not quite sure what the future is going to look like. I'm doing a little bit of power quality work at the moment, but what I do next in the renewable energy industry, which is the most exciting, I'm not quite sure yet. I'm looking for things that are missing, that the market's not quite addressing in Australia with the current solutions and suppliers, just so I can have a point of difference.
Well, I think if anyone wants to get in touch with Bradley, I'll put a link in the description. I won't give away your personal email address or anything, and we'll take it from there. So, Bradley, thanks very much for coming in the studio on a Sunday.
Thank you for the invite.
Okay, all right. And thank you for the pie face, vegan pies. He always brings me something to eat. It's so nice.
Well, I mean, it's that and the Chupa Chups. It's sort of, I always remember that.
My kids love your visits, by the way.
Yes, I know. And so did your students. But it's sort of, I've been handing out Chupa Chups for, 30 years now.
You might be able to see above Bradley's head, there is 1,000 Chupa Chup bin up there. That's how many we just got another one.
I mean, that in itself is a funny story because, when I, back in the 90s, you'd go and see customers on Monday. Oh, what'd you do on the weekend? Oh, yeah, took the kids to cricket, or we had a picnic, or I did some jobs in the yard. Oh, yeah, we had another baby. And so they'd want to know if I was handing out cigars. And being a non-smoker, I started handing out Chupa Chups. And there's lots of interesting stories along the way, but it culminated where I did a big job for defence, and it required a customised surge reduction filter, a big 2-metre board that had to be cut down to fit into the switch room. And about 3 or 4 months later, I mean, I'd sent one of those tins down to the factory, and about 4 months later, I got a phone call from the general manager and the owner saying, Bradley, I wondered how South Australia got their orders out the door before the East Coast, the bigger states. And he said, I was walking around the factory this morning and everyone had one of these little white sticks hanging out of their mouth. So it's, and I have a supplier, a good friend, a supplier is from South Africa, and every time I talk to him on the phone, hello, Mr. Joppa Jop. How are you today, Mr. Joppa Jop? So it's become synonymous.
Along with the hat. Yeah.
Along with that. I mean, I used to work on farms, so I've sort of been wearing the hat for forever. But
it's an icon of yours.
It's sort of, it's sort of, I went to an Intellect conference up in Brisbane, and I was looking for a particular guy, and the chap I was talking to looked around at him and said, oh yeah, the guy over there with the hat. So it's become handy to stand out in crowds.
Yeah, and with PowerPlus-Energy staff, it shows they all had the Cobras on.
Simon Zaglinski and Edwin Cotter
towering in
models with their hats on.
They are. Cool. Well, anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I'll be back next Sunday. Don't know what it's going to be. I think I might have another guest next Sunday, but I'll announce that as I do with my DMs. So anyway, till then, see you later.
I see it when you walk my way.
Are we meant to dance now?